Hi, everyone, and welcome to the next interview of the Masters of Manifestation Online Summit 2020. I hope you're well. Today, I'm with Dawson Church. Thank you very much, Dawson, for being here. It's an honor. Um, Dawson is the founder of the National Institute for Integrated Healthcare, also the author of Mind to Matter, which is a mind-blowing book about this topic that we are dealing with today. And I really invite you to read this book or the audiobook or to book it in physical version or Kindle version. It will change your perspective on life and how life works. I'm that bold to say that. And I'm very glad to discuss manifestation with you today about your own journey and about your research, what you discovered, and how to give faith to people who are watching us today that it's possible. It's definitely possible for anyone. So thank you for being here. I give you 5 minutes to introduce yourself with your own words, to talk about your journey and what happened to you that bring you here today.
I love sharing about this, Kevin, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to share with your community. And so the whole idea of manifestation was really foreign to me early on in my life. When I was in college and when I was a young man, I really wasn't manifesting things I wanted. And so it's been a big shift to me to actually then look at all the science behind manifestation and write that book, Mind to Matter. And so initially I was working in the book publishing industry, and after a while became really intrigued by energy therapies and how energy therapies were able to really produce shifts in people. I saw improved wound healing. I saw improved vitality. I even saw people heal spontaneously from serious diseases. So I knew that these kinds of energy healing methods were effective. And then I got into research and then helped catalyze the development of the field through many randomized controlled trials, meta-analyses, high-level studies. And so now there are literally thousands of studies of energy techniques like acupuncture and energy medicine, energy healing, acupressure, tapping, and meditation. Literally thousands of studies showing that these shifts in awareness and shifts in energy are producing effects in the body. And then later on, after being in book publishing for a long time, I really moved into advocacy, especially in science. So I began to give talks. I wrote my first big best-selling book called The Genie in Your Genes, where I gathered together the evidence showing that our thoughts, our experiences, our consciousness are literally producing changes in the expression of genes in our bodies. And at this point, most people know that just because you have a gene doesn't mean it's expressed. So genes have to be turned on to be effective. And so which genes are expressed and which genes are not expressed is largely up to us. Only about 15% of our genome is fixed. Height, eye color, hair color, things like that, those are all fixed genes. That's only 15% of the total. The other 85% is largely up to us, and whether we take care of ourselves, whether we exercise, get good food, have clean water, whether we take care of our thoughts and our minds is incredibly important. And so I wrote that book, and it was just a remarkable success. I began to give keynote speeches, began to give live workshops, and then that led 10 years later to me really looking into this whole area of manifestation. I'd heard this idea that your thoughts create your reality. So I decided to actually trace it in science and see how many links there were in that chain between thought to thing. I have a thought and then a thing manifests. And I've noticed that in my life, at this point, things manifest really easily. But I wanted to look at the links in the chain between thought and thing. And I expected when I wrote Mind to Matter that I'd be showing people a partial chain. There's this link, but then there's some missing links, and then a few more links, and then missing links, and then here's matter. What I found, much to my surprise, was that every single link in the chain between us having a thought and something manifesting can be tracked, and there's evidence for it in science. Every single part of that causal chain from thought to thing can be tracked scientifically. And then I eventually, in the material I didn't have a chance to put into mind to matter, I wrote a third book called Bliss Brain, all about the extraordinary emotional states and spiritual states people achieve when they start to move into that kind of a space. So that's kind of the trajectory. Book publishing, then Genie in Your Genes, then Mind to Matter, then Bliss Brain, and really showing people that extraordinary things are possible. You can literally turn on genes inside your body with just one thought. You can create enzymes. You can cause the synthesis of proteins in your body literally by thought alone. And so we are remarkable creators. The only problem is most of us don't do it consciously. We're doing it unconsciously. And so all my work now is asking people to take conscious control of their lives, to do the things that will trigger the highest level of health, happiness, and well-being. So that's where I am now, being happy myself, enjoying myself a lot, and also sharing this work with as many people as I possibly can.
Thank you for that explanation, Dawson. So if I understand, you had no scientific background before to jump into the material as you were in the book publishing industry, or did you study science before?
No, I was entirely in the book publishing industry. And I had to actually retrain myself, go back to university, and complete my doctorate when I was first moving to that field. And so now I found science is a really powerful tool for not just experiencing these states, but measuring them. So I can do healing with you, or a healer can work with you, and you'll feel a shift in your body, and that shift is wonderful. But let's measure stuff. Let's measure your levels of cortisol. Let's measure your levels of alpha brain waves. Let's measure your levels of immunoglobulin antibodies that protect your body from viruses. So all of these things are measurable. And while experience is great, and we know from the mystics like Rumi and Hafiz and Ramakrishna and St. Francis and St. Teresa, we know people can reach these extraordinary states. What I'm really interested in is measuring them. Can I measure just how happy you are? And it turns out with science, with an MRI, I can measure what's going on with you. I can literally take an EEG brainwave of your brain, and I will tell you how happy you are. I'll tell you how much sleep you're getting. I'll tell you whether you're in flow or whether you're in anxiety. I can tell all that, and so can anyone in neuroscience. We can tell that just by one glance at an EEG chart. So now all of these modern scientific tools are allowing us to study and quantify all of these elevated emotional states.
Okay, great. Yes, science is a backup now for manifestation. We are able to understand, if we go back few decades in the past, for example, take that example of Think and Grow Rich, which is a book written by Napoleon Hill almost 100 years ago. What he described in his book that is still a bestseller today, it's manifestation, it's the law of attraction, it's how to have faith in order to follow your intuition, your desire, and make it happen without apparent effort. And there are literally no science backup at that time. And still the process is described perfectly. And in your book, Mind to Matter, the same process is described again from a scientific point of view, from another understanding point of view. And to talk about you and your journey, what was the starting point of this new life that you started to manifest? Was it like a specific idea? Was it a vision, a big picture you had in your mind that you couldn't let go of? Was it more like a feeling, an intuition, a calling that there is something for you to do? Like, how would you describe this starting point?
My starting point was utter despair.
Mm-hmm.
Utter despair. When I was 15 years old, I was I was just in a state of anxiety, depression. People couldn't stand to be around me. I was so toxically depressed. I'd had a difficult childhood. I had PTSD from my childhood. And so at 15 years old, one day I was walking through a hotel and there was a full-length mirror on the wall. And I stopped and just looked at myself at 15, boy, long brown hair, curly hair, and I had on these blue bell-bottom trousers and a bag of books slung over my shoulder. And as I looked into my own eyes, these words flashed into my head. And those words were, "That is the saddest face I've ever seen." So that was where I was at 15. I knew I needed to improve myself. I began taking correspondence courses from a university in psychology. I went and lived on a spiritual community, and I was living in spiritual communities on and off for many years, growing organic vegetables, learning about the principles behind the world's great religions, meditating, doing energy healing. And so 15, 16, 17, and I focused on spirituality and psychology for many years. And Kevin, I got a little bit happier, but only a little bit. And so fast forward another 30 years of gradually digging myself out from under this just hole of misery I was in. I was at the age of 45, I was with a life coach one day, and I was getting in a very difficult part of my life. I had 2 young children back then. I was a single father. I was struggling with my business. And she said to me, "Dawson, do you meditate?" Now, I'd learned to meditate at 15 in the spiritual community, but I'd never had a practice, a regular practice, because it was hard. I'd close my eyes and I'd think about all the bad stuff going on in my past and worried about my future. And I couldn't get anywhere in meditation. And most people can't when they first try. But that day, I said, I'm going to make a commitment to daily meditation. And so I had to get up every day at 6:30 to get my kids ready for school. But the next morning, I set the alarm for 5:30 a.m., meditated an hour, and I never missed a day. I just meditated for virtually every day that year. And by the end of that year, my health had improved. I had far more energy. My money situation had improved dramatically. My relationships had improved a lot. I was off into this new career. Everything changed the day I made that commitment to daily meditation. So that really was the pivot point to me in the manifestation of everything that happened. And so you may feel things in meditation. What you're likely to see, though, is you're likely to see manifestation outside of yourself, in your money, your career, your love relationships, your family relationships. All of these things will start to change, but you have to make that commitment to meditate.
Okay. Yeah, I like what you say about. Thank you for sharing, being vulnerable to sharing about your journey. Yeah, meditation. People try it once and they say like, oh, there are all those thoughts in my mind, and I cannot stop them, so I cannot meditate. And this is not really the point of meditation. It's not possible to stop thinking. It's like breathing. The only way to stop that is to die. You constantly have thoughts. So the point is not about to stop having thought, but taking the control over the thought through time. It's a process that we have to learn, and the only way to learn is to do it and fail and fail and fail until that day, after 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, you start to feel a change.
Yes, that's right. You have to keep on doing it. And that 30 days and 60 days, those are good benchmarks, because research shows that within 30 days of meditating under 15 minutes a day, your brain already starts to change anatomically, and you start to switch from in mind to matter. I call it caveman brain. And the reason we can't meditate when we close our eyes is because just think about your ancestor 500,000 years ago. If your ancestor, in the middle of a hostile environment with other tribes and predators and all of these threats, if your ancestor closed his eyes, sat down, and was like, had his eyes closed for an hour or 2 hours, he got eaten. So all the people
Yeah.
who meditated back then got eaten, weeded from the gene pool, and the people who were the most suspicious, the most paranoid, the most aware of threats, they are the ones who survived. So up to 70% of our brain tissue is dedicated toward assessing threats from the environment, responding to them. And in mind to matter, I call that caveman brain. And that's what kept us safe and made us survive back along the way. Now, caveman brain is killing us. In mind to matter, I have a list of all the things that result from caveman brain, like high cortisol. You have high cortisol, that means you have lowered immunity, means you have less muscle mass. It damages your bone density and skin elasticity. It damages the hippocampus of the brain, where you create new memory and new learning. There's a whole long list of adverse effects from caveman brain. And cumulatively, if you keep on thinking negatively year after year, decade after decade, research shows that people with negative thinking die a lot sooner. How much sooner? About 10 years sooner. And so you are going to think yourself into a much earlier grave if you don't learn to rescue yourself from that phrase I use in Mind to Matter, which is caveman brain. It was great for your ancestors 500,000 years ago. It's terrible for you now. And so it's essential you learn stress reduction tools to bring yourself out of that brain and then start to have what I call an awareness in Mind to Matter. I call an awareness of non-local mind rather than your local environment. And caveman brain had to be really aware of your local environment. What's around that corner? What's lurking in those bushes? That's perfect. A local mind awareness. We all need that. But Chapter 1, Chapter 7 of Mind to Matter, I talk about ascending to non-local mind, going where the mystics go, letting go of your preoccupation with yourself, and then allowing your consciousness to actually merge with that glorious universe we live in. And in non-local mind, of course, there's all this joy, there's all this love, there's all this compassion, there's all this altruism, and there's all this wisdom. And that's what Napoleon Hill in chapter 15 of Think and Grow Rich said. He said he lets go of his local self. He merges with what he called his invisible council. He goes and talks to higher powers. He goes and talks to St. Francis of Assisi, and he goes and talks to Thomas Edison, and he goes to talks to all these geniuses of the past. And that's where he gets his ideas in non-local mind, and he brings them then back down to local mind. So that's the process we have to learn to do to be effective manifestors.
Yeah, exactly. I like that example that you take about Napoleon Hill. And in the book, Think and Grow Rich, there is his assistant saying that he's kind of crazy because he had all of this meeting with dead people, and he's just sitting in a room with a lot of dead people, and is just bringing him the thought and energies, and it can last for hours like this, where there is Edison and all those famous people at that time. Some of them were dead, some of them were not, but imagining a meeting with them and imagining what would they tell him, how they would advise him, etc. And it could last for hours.
And we can all tap into that genius. What people don't realize is that what you're doing when you do that is you tap into genius. Albert Einstein said that all great scientific discoveries are made in altered states of consciousness. Napoleon Hill said you can't solve the problem at your current level of consciousness. You have to let go of it, and you have to then move into a much higher consciousness. But you find when you do that, that there are these sources of wisdom and sources of love and sources of integration. And when we measure this in the brains of master manifestors, we find a lot of a particular brainwave called gamma. And gamma is the signature wave of integration. And so in gamma, our brains are integrating information from all the different regions of our brain effectively. And so master manifestors will take an idea from this part, this field, it'll take an idea from music and they'll apply it to mathematics. They'll take a concept from perhaps from zoology and they'll apply it to a totally different field of in the culinary arts. And then suddenly they'll make these really fruitful connections. So that's gamma. And Einstein said, that's how every great scientific insight has occurred. You read about all the breakthroughs in quantum physics and chemistry, in mathematics, and you find that people just saw the equation. Einstein himself, he'd been wrestling with the theory of relativity for 4 years, struggling unsuccessfully. And one night in a dream, he saw the whole thing. It took him another 2 years to write it all out, but he saw it in a single intuitive flash. And so people are, we're struggling here, Kevin. We're worried about this in our money, and this in our investments, and this in our marriage, and this with our kids, and our parents are getting older, and there's this with the food supply, and this with global politics, and this with global warming. I mean, there are all these things to engage caveman brain. And so if you want to get worried, stressed, confused, upset, overwhelmed, outraged, there's plenty to do that in the environment. And if you are doing that, if you're engaging with the environment, then you're devoting this magnificent manifestational thing called your brain and your mind, and you're handing it to somebody else in the environment out there. You want to direct the thoughts of your mind consciously, make yourself the master of that mind. And then, like Napoleon Hill, you are tapping into the same huge realm of knowledge that Gandhi tapped into and did something unbelievable, that Martin Luther King tapped into and changed the whole fabric of a society. Things that these geniuses like Einstein did, and then created extraordinary breakthroughs. That's where the breakthroughs come from. They don't come from trying to solve the problems down here at the local mind level. So that's why in Mind to Matter I say, spend at least that meditation hour of your day. Let go of local mind. Let go of who you think you are. Let go of your conditioning. Let go of the set of limitations you carry, and merge with non-local mind. And when you do, miracles happen, and you have access to this whole realm of possibilities you don't have access to in local mind. And then you bring that down into local mind. And I'll tell you what happens then. There are several studies I talk about in Mind to Matter, is that when you bring down the genius of non-local into your local mind, you are far more productive. In one study, the researchers found that people's ability to solve difficult, complicated problems increased by 500% after they entered that flow state of oneness with non-local mind. So you aren't just feeling better, you aren't just producing good hormones and neurochemicals and genes in your body, you are literally 5 times as productive, 5 times as creative, 5 times as more able to solve complex problems when you return to your local mind state. You are a super productive person. You are a super problem solver. You can do things. You have superpowers in the outside world you don't have, unless you surrender your local mind preoccupation and blend with non-local mind, and enjoy all the happiness and all the love there, and then bring that knowledge down to your local mind world.
Okay. Yeah, we become kind of superhero with powers that are not the same as Batman or Superman, but we can tap into that power of flow, as you said. And you, like what you say, you not only feel better, you are better. You do better.
You're a performer. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So talking about manifestation, what is your definition of manifestation? And what are the examples in your own life of conscious manifestation? Like you consciously directing a thought of an intuition or a picture in your mind to creating it in your physical reality without apparent effort. Of course, this is the art of manifestation.
Yeah. Well, my book is called Mind to Matter, and it's not called Mind over Matter. And there are a lot of teachers who talk about the law of attraction or the secret in the sense of, I'm going to have this vision of something and I'm going to see it happen outside there. And I actually don't believe in that in the same way. I think that's just manipulation. And I've done that at times. And I can tell you some stories if we have time about how disastrous it was. I manifested things. They weren't my highest good. So what I talk about instead in Mind to Matter is that when we go through this process of relaxing and releasing our preoccupation with local mind and blend with non-local mind, then our goals, our intentions, and our thoughts are those of non-local mind. And what non-local mind wants is the highest good for everything and everyone. And so then we want the highest good for everyone and everything. And we become less obsessed with our own story as we are able to merge with this. And we want what non-local mind wants. And non-local mind's vision, the universe's vision of your potential, is infinitely greater than your own vision of your potential. Our vision of our own potential is limited by our conditioning. And so we'll say, well, I don't want the girlfriend I used to have. I don't want somebody like that. I don't want the kind of car I used to have, or I want that kind of car, or I want to live in Denver, or I want a job in advertising. You know, we have all these things we want at the local mind level. When you move to the level of non-local mind, often our wants and desires change dramatically, and then we manifest effortlessly from that perspective. So we're manifesting non-local mind in local reality. And the story I begin Mind to Matter with is one of the, I mean, I've had so many examples of this in my life of just thinking things. So I begin the book by sharing a story about writing The Genie in Your Genes. And I was under a deadline to write it. I wasn't meeting my writing deadlines. And so I decided just to fly out to Hawaii for 2 weeks, rent a condominium, rent a little room, and then spend 2 weeks there and finish the book. So I went to Hawaii. I got a condominium. I rented a Jeep because I like to go to some of the inaccessible beaches on the island. And I throw my scuba gear and my snorkeling equipment in the back of the Jeep, go out to a beach, swim for a while, come back and write to get the book done. And so I'd been swimming around, snorkeling around this beautiful bay called Lawai Bay for a couple of hours one day in the afternoon. And I swam back to the shore, went to the Jeep, put my hand in the pocket of my bathing suit to get the keys out, and no keys. No car keys. And I realized I must have dropped them somewhere. So I walked back to the change room, walked back to the beach. The keys were nowhere to be found. Not only that, these weren't just the car keys, but I had clipped the apartment keys to the car keys. So now there were 2 keys there, and I couldn't get into the car, couldn't get into my apartment. And so I thought, you know, I'm not going to react. I'm just going to stay and flow this wonderful space, and I'm going to swim out there and look around. But it's about 6 to 12 feet deep in Lawai Bay. I'd been diving down to the bottom and diving up again. And so somewhere in one of those dives, the keys had slidden out. And this was a huge area, several acres in size. And so I swam around there for a while looking for the keys, but amid all the coral and all the debris on the bottom of the bay, looking for 2 tiny keys in this huge area was just impossible. But I didn't react, and I stayed in flow. And then as it was getting dark at that point, but this father and his 3 sons had just come down for a last swim in the bay before the sun set. And my intuition said, go talk to those 4 men. Swam over there, and I said to them, you know, I've seen you guys have been swimming around here, diving to the bottom. Did any of you find anything on the bottom among the coral there? And the youngest boy held up my keys. So, you know, when you stay in the flow, when you don't panic, I could have gone into panic and then said, I'm determined to find those, I'm going to manifest those keys. That puts you out of the flow. And what we see when we hook up master manifestors to EEGs is their brains are in flow states. Their brain waves are highly coherent. And in the book, I actually have side by side the brain waves of a coherent person and a non-coherent person. And people who fail to manifest, people who struggle through life, are often exhibiting these non-coherent brainwaves. If you meditate, there are 30 practices. Meditation, there's Qigong, there's time in nature. There are 30 different practices in Mind to Matter. But when you do those practices, you literally can put your brain into this beautiful coherent state in which you are one with the universe. And at the end of Mind to Matter, I have some really remarkable research done by the HeartMath Institute, and they were tracking the heart coherence of a meditator for a month. This is a person who goes into a deep heart coherent state regularly, lives that way. And so for a whole month, 30 days, they track this person's heart coherence, and there were peaks, there were valleys, there were troughs. And then at the same time, they were tracking these huge geomagnetic patterns of the planet. So as this, of course, the sun is our nearest star. It has there's solar particles that go past Earth in the form of the solar wind. That's going about 2 million miles an hour past the Earth. It's producing all these fluctuations in the Earth's electromagnetic field. And so they were tracking that for a month. And they track these fluctuations that are caused by sunspots and the solar wind. And at the end of the book, stunning piece of research, I have this graph, and it shows the heart coherent person and the solar activity, the geomagnetic activity of the Earth, and they track each other just like this. They're tracking each other all through the month. This person who is in this coherent state, heart coherent, brain coherent, they are literally in a state of coherence with these enormous cycles the size of the solar system. So that's mind to matter. That's manifestation. That's when you get inspiration and ideas far beyond the ones you can conjure up at the level of local mind. And that's really what I recommend people do. So that's how I do it. That's what I do. I find things just showing up in my life. In my book, This Brain, I have one story about thinking about, I had this thought maybe around 2015. I'd love to meet Tony Robbins. I've done presentations and met a lot of big personal growth coaches, but they're at conferences, and Tony doesn't do other people's conferences. It has to be, he only does his own events usually. So it's like, I want to meet Tony Robbins, but I took no action on it. I didn't do anything to make it happen. I just had this thought, I'd love to meet Tony Robbins. And then suddenly in 2018, this email showed up in my inbox from one of his team members saying, would you like to speak at a Tony Robbins event? And I thought it was a hoax. I thought someone was just having fun with me. But I emailed them back and said, as long as I can meet Tony, I'll be there. So they flew me out to Abu Dhabi, and I shared the stage with Tony Robbins. So again, all these mysterious things seem to happen in my life, like that. Having a thought, suddenly a thing appears, and you start to get really careful, Kevin, about what you think about, because you know that thing you're thinking about is highly likely to show up in your life. So you want to think and imagine and create from that level of non-local intelligence, non-local mind, that has your highest good at heart, and it has the highest good for all at heart, and then you're creating things that are in sync with the highest good for all.
Okay, that's a beautiful story. As you said at the beginning, there is no science is able to explain all the parts of mind to matter of manifestation. So we're able to understand what happened at each stage of manifestation. We're able to see that first you have to put yourself and your mind in another state, and believing that it already happened, like by picturing yourself as if you already achieve a certain reality. And that's thought alone, that imaging alone, start to trigger your mechanical system inside, and you start to we're able to see that there is change inside in terms of gene, in terms of proteins, and I can talk about that because I healed myself from thought alone, from visualization. In only 45 minutes, I healed myself from a 2 years long tailbone injury. I was in pain each time I was sitting. Like I'm sitting right now, and when I was sitting like this, it was painful for me to the point where I could pass out sometimes. And I had 2 years of nightmare because you know that we are sitting a lot, and no doctors could tell me what I had. I did scan, I did tons of things, and all the time it was like, no answer. We don't know what you have. And I could touch the pain point with my finger to the point where I was screaming in front of the doctors to tell them, like, I have something here. And I already started to manifest things at the time in my life, but surprisingly, I didn't have the belief that I could heal myself by thought alone. And just by entertaining that idea, one day I decided to try, and I created that reality in my mind where each time I was sitting, it was a pure feeling of joy. And then I was like literally jumping when I was sitting pretty violently, and there that bliss and excitement and happiness in me. And I was like, that's so good. And in only 45 minutes, I completely healed myself because I changed my belief. I told my subconscious mind, hey, this is my new reality. I'm now when I'm sitting, it's a feeling of joy and bliss. And because I entertained that idea and I for like 45 minutes again and again and again and again and created an elevated emotion and elevated experience inside me, suddenly it clicked and I spent the next 3 days jumping everywhere when I was sitting and my girlfriend was telling me like, what are you doing? I was just answering like, I cannot believe it. I cannot believe it. Like it happened.
Yeah. And what you
So
were doing
yeah.
then, when you had that thought, is you were building a new neural pathway. And that's the tricky thing about manifestation, is you have to build the neural pathway before you can see something. And so there's this old saying, I don't know if it's universal, but in English, it's I'll believe it when I see it. And actually, that's
Yeah.
exactly the reverse of what we have to do. You will see it when you believe it, because you have to build the neural pathways to see it before you can see what's right in front of you. So you are building this neural pathway around sitting equals ease, sitting equals joy, sitting is fine. And you have to build that neural pathway for a while. It took 45 minutes. It may have taken longer, may have taken less,
Yeah.
but you have to build that neural pathway. You have to turn those neurons that were firing together into neurons that were wiring together. And then when they were wired together around your new belief, then you could see it manifest around you. And that's why people say, well, I don't really believe in all this stuff. You have to believe, and you have to put yourself in the position of actually being there as though it were an actual fact in the absence of it being there. So it's not even being there, it's you feeling as though it's there and you building those neural pathways before you see them. There's one funny story. I tell lots of stories in Mind to Matter. So the book Mind to Matter is based on about 400 scientific studies, but there are also stories like one woman who went to see a therapist, a psychologist friend of mine, and she said, I'd love to find the perfect relationship. But she said to her psychologist, all the good men are taken. Now there's a belief, core belief, all the good men are taken. So she's been firing and wiring that neural bundle now for 5, 10, 15 years. All the good men are taken. And she had no belief that there was someone out there for her. So my psychologist friend worked with her and helped her release that belief over the course of some sessions. And then one day the client walked in and said to my psychologist friend, I found this guy who has all the qualities of a man I've been looking for. I'm really excited. We've been on a couple of dates, and I think this guy is a real possibility. And they later got married. But in that psychotherapy session where she told the psychologist she found the man, eventually the psychologist asked her, just give me a sense of how this all happened. Like, how did you meet him? And the client said, oh, I met him at work. And my friend Pat, the psychologist, said, well, in terms of your work, where does he sit in your office? And she said, oh, his 2 cubicles down from me. And then Pat said to her, and how long has he worked 2 cubicles down from you? And her client said, about 6 months. And I tell that story because her future husband was sitting 2 cubicles away from her for 6 months, and she couldn't see him because of her belief that all the good men are taken. So our beliefs can stop us from seeing the good things, the husband, the money, the investment idea, the practice we use to help us, our bodies be healthier. All this information is here in this great global, non-local information field, and often it's right here in our physical surroundings as well. We just can't see it because we don't believe it. So if you're waiting to see it before you believe it, start believing it before you see it. Inhabit that sense of what you want to see happen, but from the perspective of non-local mind. Because in non-local mind, things are effortless. You swim out, you see somebody, they hold up your keys. It happens effortlessly. There's no struggle. You meet people who say, I'm a self-made woman, I'm a self-made man, I put in all this hard work, and their whole lives are about effort and struggle. And that's hard on the psyche, it's hard on the body. You want to be an effortless manifester. You want to just have things flow like meeting Tony Robbins. Let things just come to you. Hold them in your mind, let them come there easily. Conceive them during meditation sessions. Meditate, get into non-local mind. What does the universe want for you? And then you see things happening on the outside, and they're all in the flow. So that's the way to do it effortlessly without all that struggle and effort.
Yeah, I love that story. Like what you said, that the man was already there, but she couldn't see it. So the art of manifestation is not about suddenly there is something that is going to be created out of nowhere. Everything is already created. Everything is already here. Maybe it's at the state of pure energy. It's at the state of mind, and it will become matter later. But it's already here. All you have to do is to hold on to the idea, to nourish and entertain the idea, the intuition, the desire that you have, and there will have those synchronicities that will happen. That will happen inside with like new ideas that suddenly if you think about something like, why I've never thought about that before, or you will see something outside that will completely resonate with what you were entertaining in your mind. Like can be feeling like there is Harry Potter nearby you and putting a spell on you because it's kind of unbelievable. Like, wow, how does that happen?
Yeah.
And so, as you say, there are scientific explanations nowadays. We are able to explain the process of moving from a thought to its manifestation into reality. So why is there so much resistance about this topic? There's some manifestation, what other people call your belief create your reality. Other people call that the law of attraction. Why is there so much resistance? Because the law of attraction is a natural law, like the law of gravity. And no one questioned the law of gravity. Why everyone is questioning another natural law, which is the law of attraction?
Well, you mentioned earlier resonance and a sense of resonance, and that's how a lot of creation happens. If you look at nature, everything begins in nature as resonance, as vibration, and then congeals as material reality. So things begin as energy, and then they manifest as molecules and concrete things. And so everything is energy. When our energy changes, then we have a different resonance signal we're putting out there. So we meet people we wouldn't have otherwise met, and all kinds of things happen. And so I know for me, the reason I was so turned off by manifestation, visualization, the law of attraction, was that when I was 20 years old, when I was 25 years old, I looked around at my life and I would look at my health, and I was in pain a lot of the time. I had a terrible car. I never got the job I wanted. I was in a miserable relationship. And so I would look around and say, I don't want any of these things. And yet they're here in my life year after year after year. They aren't changing for many, many, many years. So clearly the law of attraction doesn't work, because here I am not wanting this stuff, I don't want any of these things I've got. And I've still got them year after 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 year. So that's why I thought that it didn't work. And also, um, it's hard to take responsibility then when all these things are showing up in your life that are unpleasant, and then say, I created that? Really? There's no way I want to imagine I could create that. I want to create something different. So I think that's a lot of the reason people are resistant toward it. And the paradox is that when you say, okay, I'm going to create something different in my mind only, there's a big psychological tension here. Now you have, for example, just like, for example, when I was living in New York City after I got out of college, and it was 1979, 1980, and I had a terrible car. I had this old beat up Datsun B210, green. I called the color, it was a horrible color of green. I called it gangrene. And it had a big slash of rust across the side where I'd had an accident, and it wouldn't run part of the time. I'd have to push the car around, because it wasn't running. And I'd look around at me at all these beautiful cars, 1980. In the 1980, the best car in the world was the Rolls-Royce Silver Spirit. Just this magnificent new car Rolls had come out with. Jensen Healey's, the Fiat Spider was incredibly popular back then. And so the Mercedes 380 SEC was like the best two-door car on the market. I look at all these cars and I'd be dealing with this crummy Datsun B210. So fast forward 20 years, and I own a Rolls-Royce Silver Spirit, and I own a Mercedes C380. I own two Jensen Healeys. I have a Fiat Spider. So I have all these cool cars, a long time from now. So at the time, I just was in this place where I couldn't imagine creating this miserable reality. But so you learn to inhabit that feeling. And then as you learn to have that feeling, you start to build those neural pathways. When you do that, you start to become resonant with different people, different energies, and then suddenly you find opportunities open up for you. And that's the thing. People don't want to accept the law of attraction because it means they have to accept responsibility for having created what they have in their lives right now. What if you have cancer? What if you have people who died around you? What if you lost all your money? What if your mortgage is underwater? It's hard to accept that you have any part in this reality, and if you do, and I'll give you one example from very, very recently. So the pandemic hit around early February of 2020, and suddenly there were all these lockdowns all over the world, and people couldn't congregate in big groups. And in my state of California, where I live, all the restaurants had to shut down. And so for week after week after week, month after month after month, the dining rooms of these restaurants were closed down. And so a lot of them just went out of business. And I walked past this pub called Murphy's Pub in downtown around the end of February, early March. And again, the dining room was closed. There was a sign on the window, and it was a handwritten cardboard sign. And it said, "We've been around for 31 years, but we don't see the light at the end of this tunnel. So long, it's been good knowing you." And they closed the pub down forever, for good. And so that was one experience I had with a closure. But that same week, my wife and I thought, we've been eating inside, making our own food for a few weeks. Let's order out. So we telephoned an order into Betty's Barbecue. And Betty's Barbecue had a setup where you phoned in your order, placed your order for food, and then you drove about 15, 20 minutes later, and there was a table outside the restaurant, and you just picked up your order in a paper bag. So I drove to get the food, and standing behind the table was Betty, the owner of Betty's Barbecue. And I saw all these bags of food there. And I said, "How's your business doing?" She said, "It's doing great." She said, "I'd always wanted to open a takeout business in addition to my dining room." She pointed to the closed, dark dining room behind her. "And now I have. And we're doing about the same amount of business takeout now as we were before in the dining room." So I said, what about your staff, your waiters who can't work anymore?" She said, "Oh, we've hired them all as food preparers in the kitchen." So now, of course, the restaurants are opening. Now Betty has two businesses, her thriving takeout business and her newly opened dine-in business, whereas Murphy's is still closed. Two people with the same reality. this identical reality. The dining room's closed. One's consciousness is, how can I thrive? The other is, I don't see light at the end of the tunnel. And so one now has double the business, and the other is out of business based purely on their consciousness. So when you start accepting things as they are, accepting your power to create your own reality, you are an empowered creator. And it may mean accepting a bad thing, that my dining room's closed. Tragic, I lost my job, my mortgage, my house, my value of my house has dropped. But people who are creative, who are resilient, who are in touch with non-local mind, they say, I'm going to open a takeout business. And so
Mhm.
it all begins with accepting your reality and then seeing possibility, living that possibility in your mind before it manifests. And then as you take responsibility for your life and start to practice these kinds of techniques, you find great things happening all around you. So it starts with taking full responsibility for your life the way it is, even if you're driving a gangrene Datsun B210 with a big rust stripe down the end, down the side. You just accept your life the way it is, and then you start that process of manifestation and creation.
Okay. I love that. Yeah, and I love the fact that it's a recent example about, especially about COVID, because a lot of people see COVID from a negative, a bad perspective, and COVID is COVID helped that business owner to thrive because she had that idea, and boom, suddenly she had the synchronicity, the opportunity came to her to kind of force her to create what she's been entertaining her mind for so long, I guess. I have another story about manifestation during COVID time. It's a pretty long story, so I would keep some part, but at the beginning of the year when I started to think about this event that I'm creating right now, I didn't have an office. I was living in a place where there was just one bedroom, and I was trying to figure out like, how am I going to do all this recording, those interviews, like if I don't have an office, a closed room where I'm it's quiet and I can do my own things there. And at the beginning of the year, I say that in September 2020, I'm going to move to a beautiful house. I'm living in Bali, in Indonesia, and houses are pretty expensive here. And usually, you have to pay 1 year in advance, and can be like a few $1,000, like 10,000, 20, $30,000 according to the house. Um, and I didn't know how to do it, but I entertained that idea at the beginning of the year that I'm in September 2020. I'm going to move to a new house with industrial looks, with a swimming pool, with a garden, with an office, etc., etc. But in my mind, I was like, it won't be possible for me to afford it, not right now. And then COVID started, and then Indonesia closed the country, so there are no more tourists. And then in beginning of September 20, there is that new house where I'm in right now, who were available on markets, but with a very discounted price, like 50, almost 50% of the original price, because there are there are no tourists, there are no people here. So the owner had to cut the price in order to find someone to rent it. And boom, it was the first week of September 2020. I found that house on the Facebook Marketplace, and I visited it. And 1 hour after, I said yes, and I didn't know how to do it, but the universe has been in charge of creating that for me, because I visualize myself there. I make a vision board with the kind of house that I want, and it really looks alike. Um, but because, as you said, I believed it, and I created the belief in my mind, imagining myself in that house, um, being sure with a bit from a naive perspective that I would move there in September 2020. And I like what you say about belief, because people who say, I believe what I see, I mean, there is no belief. There is no belief. I mean, if you are wearing shoes, you don't say that I believe that I'm wearing shoes. You are wearing shoes. So what you see doesn't involve belief at all. The act of courage and the boldness of faith is to believing in something that you cannot experience with your five senses.
And the other interesting corollary to that is that when you are really comfortable in what you're experiencing, so I'm just imagining myself in I call it my imaginarium, my imaginary world. I'm just visualizing this thing. I'm inhabiting, I'm feeling this. And in the techniques I teach in Mind to Matter, we also have you focus it on all five sensory channels. We have you taste what it's like, smell what it's like, hear what it's like, see what it's like. So we use every single sensory channel over there. And when you're deeply experiencing it, like if I'm sitting there and I'm imagining all the sensory channels behind this thing that I want, then to my brain, I've got it. And so you actually become quite indifferent to what's happening in the outside world, because I already have it over here. Now, of course, you're attracting it at the same time, but you have the feeling of it already. And then when it actually shows up in your life, well, it's just that material thing, but you've already been experiencing it vividly already. And it sounds like you were doing that with a house in Bali. So that's the way to do this, is you have to have that vivid sense of it and really inhabit that deeply. And then also all the parts of your psyche come into alignment around that. You don't have parts of your, I teach a lot of live workshops, 1-day workshops, 2-day workshops, 4-day workshops. Often we find that people have conscious belief and then 10 subconscious blocks to that belief. They don't know they're even there. And so they're saying, I want this, but then subconsciously is saying, I'll give you an example, weight loss. So a woman says, I'm 50 kilograms overweight. I want to lose that weight. And what you'll find is that subconsciously, there's some argument, like part of it might be saying, yeah, but when you were skinny, you got all this unwanted attention, which you don't get now. So there's part of her that's actually arguing against her success, and she's trying diet after diet after diet. Another subconscious script might be, oh yeah, but you have to give up the foods you love the most. So you've got to resolve these conflicts between the subconscious and the conscious mind. And so I teach a technique called EFT tapping. I write about it a lot in Mind to Matter. I teach these classes about it, and we help people actually identify these subconscious blocks, because until we tell people, we call them tail enders. And so you have your conscious goal, I want to lose 50 pounds, want to lose 50 kilograms. And then there's this tail ender that says, yeah, but then I couldn't eat the foods I love. So that's the real affirmation. I don't want to lose the foods I love. This over here isn't the real affirmation. So your affirmation is coming true. It's just that not the conscious affirmation, it's the subconscious one. You have to learn to find those, work on them, and release them, and then you become unified in your mind behind your goals, and you move ahead.
Yeah, exactly. I love that example, because if you don't have the thing that you think you want, it's because you created the block, you created the resistance, and it's not so much about getting there, but more about removing what doesn't allow you to get there at the moment. Sometimes that's why it can be effortless, because once you're able to identify the block, the resistance, and you remove it, then the flow start to navigate without any specific effort from your side to trying to get there. Because if you realize that that person can start to realize that, oh, maybe there is a way to keep eating what I love, but without being obese, for example. And once that belief click in, then their reality start to change.
That's right. Absolutely. And so it's all up here. People don't realize that consciousness is so creative, but it is immensely creative. And part of my work in the world is I want to convince people of this scientifically. And if I can find the science and present the science effectively, as well as stories that illustrate the science, then I can have people realize that those thoughts are creative. I'll give you one chilling example. Recently published study looked at people's positive and negative thinking and looked at the deposit of beta amyloid plaques in their brains. And so beta amyloid plaques are these like gooey substances. I have a picture of them in mind to matter, and they coat our neural bundles in our brains, and they produce Alzheimer's disease. They stop our neural bundle signaling. They accumulate over time like waste, and then eventually they shut our brains down and we die. So Alzheimer's disease is progressive. You have more and more and more beta amyloid plaques. And this study found that beta amyloid plaques in the brain were associated more strongly with negative thinking than with age, than with gender, than with socioeconomic status, than with lifestyle, than with diet. Nothing correlated as strongly with the build of beta amyloid plaques as strongly as quality of thought. The more negative thinking people did, the more beta amyloid plaques in their brains. So we are literally creating molecules by thought. And so those kinds of pieces of research should convince us that we need to take control of this. People they'll say negative things almost casually. They'll say, oh, I'm no good at math. I have no sense of direction. All good men are taken. You always hurt the one you love. I mean, there are all these cliches that people use, negative cliches. We don't realize that every single negative thought is accumulating and actually damaging our bodies. If you thought about, okay, I'm having a negative thought, I'm depositing beta amyloid plaques in my brain, I'm increasing my cortisol level, and you don't think of it that way, but over time, all of those little tiny thoughts chip away at your health. So you want to do work to release your trauma, to release your negative thinking, and to embrace positive thinking, because every negative thought is having a slow effect, and then cumulatively it has a big effect. And one study I talk about in the book is of optimists, and the researchers found in this huge 30-year longitudinal study, thousands of men, thousands of women, studied for 30 years, that optimism, the mental trait of optimism, was associated with a 60% greater chance of reaching the age of 85. And among those optimists who hit 85, they lived 10 years longer than pessimists. So those negative thoughts building up in your body, in your brain over time, cumulatively of your lifetime, are stealing 10 years of life from you. It's 10 years fewer you'll have to play with your grandchildren, and 10 years fewer to travel the world and make love, and 10 years fewer to enjoy the foods you love and be retired and play. So you're robbing yourself of that huge amount of life cumulatively with every single little negative thought you have. So I seriously recommend, that's why I say to people, read Mind to Matter. Use these 30 practices I have there. Find the ones that work for your lifestyle, because you don't want to be entertaining those thoughts. They are having an incredibly corrosive effect on your body, and they're dramatically shortening your lifespan.
Yeah, to the point where you create your disease. And this is what you said before. A lot of people don't believe in the law of attraction or manifestation because they're not ready to accept that they somehow created their own disease. And we can talk about cancer that is caused by stress. Mostly, it's the accumulation of stress in the body that's causes cancer, and it can be hard to accept that. Oh, I created that myself, even if it's not consciously, but there is that thing in my body right now because I entertain it with negative thought or resisting to something that I really want to do, but I haven't found the courage to do it, and all the resistance that I accumulate started to manifest itself in form of disease.
Yes. And so when you take control of your thinking and you do take responsibility for your life, maybe you have had cancer, maybe you've had some other kind of disease, and there are stories in the book of actually people who've healed themselves of cancer. Like there's one woman whose story I tell called Adeline, and she had uterine cancer. It had metastasized all over her body, and she was basically given just a few months to live. And rather than having an operation and chemotherapy and radiation, she said, you know, I know what that looks like. It's going to devastate my quality of life. I'm just going to go home and have as good a death as I possibly can. It's May. They say I have about 6 months to live, so I'm not expected to see it November. But I'm just going to go home and really nurture myself. And so she did. She quit her job. She began to take long walks in the woods every day. She would take these long, long, long baths. And as she lay in the bathtub, she would visualize these healing stars just twinkling through her body. And they were sharp pointed stars. And whenever they touched a cancer cell, they would pop it, like popping a balloon. She would do this visualization every day. And she began to feel better, began to feel stronger. November, she went back into the hospital, and the doctors could find no trace of cancer in her body. And I interviewed her 7 years later, and she was still cancer free. So it's remarkable how people can heal with just the power of their minds. There are stories in Mind to Matter of people who've healed all kinds of things, and also people who've grown parts of their bodies. There's one man called Graham Phillips. I tell his story in chapter 1 of Mind to Matter. And he was a TV show producer, has a talk show called Catalyst in Australia. And so he wanted to make a movie about learning meditation. And so he signed up for an 8-week meditation course, but he went into a lab with his TV crew and they filmed him getting all of these tests, including high resolution MRIs of every single part of his brain. And so he began to meditate after that, felt much calmer after 2 or 3 weeks, much less stressed, went back into the lab in 8 weeks, and they found that in only 2 months, parts of his brain had grown by 3, 4, 5% in only 2 months. And the part of his brain that had grown the most was a tiny little sliver of tissue right in the center of the brain called the dentate gyrus. And his dentate gyrus, that's the part of the brain that is responsible for regulating emotion across different brain regions. So it helps regulate fear, anxiety, stress, depression, all of these negative emotions. And his emotion regulation circuit, that part of his brain, the dentate gyrus, that part of the brain grew by 22.8% in 8 weeks. 22.8% growth in the volume of neurons in his dentate gyrus in only 2 months. I mean, that's how quickly we can spark having new brains. So when you're a manifester, you aren't just manifesting differences in your body, you're literally shifting the function of your brain as those neurons fire together, they wire together. In time, if you're in the state of coherence, then you have a whole different set of hardware in your brain. You literally are using the software of your mind to build the hardware of your brain.
That's an incredible result in a short period of time. Thank you for talking about this story. I have 2 more questions for you, Dawson. If you have 10 more minutes. The first question that I have for you is imagining someone who have already been successful in, it can be financially successful, like creating a business that worked well, and this person is defining his success by luck, coincidence, or mainly saying that, oh, I'm smart, or I hustled, I worked really hard, and this person, when you talk with them about manifesting or the law of attraction, they're like, oh, this is bullshit. What would you say to someone like that? What would you say to someone who say that all success, all great things in life come from either luck, coincidence, or hustle?
Well, that person may attribute their success to coincidence or hard work or hustling, and yet they hustled because they had a strong belief in the outcome. So they had a strong belief, and then they put in the effort and work, And you have to do both things. I mean, you can't just, like, if I said I wanted to share the stage with Tony Robbins and I did nothing to develop my speaking abilities, then, and I wasn't a good presenter, then I wouldn't qualify for that. So you have to do both. You have to, you want to learn to paddle a paddleboard. Well, you can have the vision in your mind of you paddleboarding, but you have to go out and get a paddleboard, maybe take a lesson or two. So you have to do both things, and you have to look at the obstacles to doing them, and also the concrete steps you can take to accomplish them. And so that person who's a hustler, that person who's a hard worker, they're a hard worker, but they had a very clear vision of where they wanted to go as well. And so when you combine doing these things outside of here with that clear vision, then you're liable to produce results. And Stephen Covey, in The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, says, begin with the end in mind. People who are manifestors begin with the end in mind. They've seen the vision, they know where they want to go, and they're moving toward it. And one of the other characteristics is be proactive. They are proactively doing things to bring themselves there. So I think many of them do work harder than they need to work, because I think that after a while it becomes effortless for them. But Arthur Rubinstein, the great classical pianist, he, at the peak of his career, he was regarded as being one of the best pianists ever in history. He was still practicing 4 hours a day.
Yeah. Yeah, practice taking action, and entertaining the idea. What I advise sometimes to people, like, if just entertain the idea for a few days, a few weeks, you're gonna think about it. If it has to be 2 hours, 3 hours a day, it's okay. Just picture it in your mind, and because you nourish that, it will somehow give you motivation or the energy to go for it, because you keep thinking about it, and then it becomes easier to taking action, because you keep living that experience in your mind.
Exactly.
All right. And my last question is an advice. What would be your best advice for people who have a feeling, a calling, an intuition, that feeling inside that is irrational and illogical, to disrupt, to do things differently, to go for that thing that they feel within, but they haven't had the courage, the confidence to go for it yet? What would be your best advice for those people? So I understood that what is essential from what you said is meditating. So going into that non-local mind by meditating, then envisioning the outcome and experiencing the outcome before it happens. Do you have any other advice for people who are really like one step from going there, but they're stopping themselves because they're afraid, they don't have faith, and the irrationality and illogical side of this intuition or this calling really stop them?
I think that our path ahead is very rarely logical, and you'll often get intuitive nudges to do things that are completely non-logical, and then you do them, and then they work out. Like I was at Esalen teaching there a while back, and we were giving a friend of ours a ride to the airport afterwards. So my wife and I were in the car, and we were supposed to meet our friend there and take her to the airport. And so we got to the office to meet our friend, and our friend wasn't there. So we didn't know why. She's a very punctual person, but she just wasn't there. So my wife walked off to try and find her. And a long time went by with me sitting in the car. And then I had this intuitive urge to get out of the car and walk into the dining room. Now, there was nothing for me there. The dining room was they weren't serving food at that time. The whole line was closed down. But I had this intuitive urge to go into the dining room at Esalen. And my logical mind said, that makes no sense whatsoever. If my wife finds our friend and comes back to the car and I'm not there, we can't leave. So this makes no sense whatsoever to get out of the car. At least I need to stay with the car so we don't have two people who are lost instead of one person who's lost. So my logical mind, Kevin, often argues me out of these things, but I've learned over the years to honor those intuitive nudges. So I got out of the car, began walking toward the dining room, and I saw this man I recognized, and I said, "Hey, Tim." And he turned around and said, "Do I know you?" And I said, "No, you don't, but my name is Dawson CHURCH. And this is Tim Ferriss. He's one of the most popular bloggers on the planet. He has a book called The 4-Hour Workweek, made him famous, and he has a lot of other books as well. And I wanted to meet Tim Ferriss for a long time. And only because our friend was delayed and lost was I there, and only because I followed my intuition to get out of the car and see Tim Ferriss. So the universe moves in really mysterious ways. And you wouldn't know why you have these impulses, you don't know why your friend is lost, and yet suddenly you're in the flow of synchronicity when you are that way. You'll meet Tony Robbins, you'll meet, I don't know who you'll meet, but things will happen to you that are very surprising. Goals you have that you aren't doing it by effort, just you're part of the synchronous flow of the universe. So you want to get into that synchronous state by meditation every morning. In Mind to Matter, I have 30 other practices you can try, like Qigong and grounding. Play around with them, use them, get yourself in that flow, one with the universe, one with non-local mind. And then you show up every day and you say, "Synchronous universe, what delight and unexpected pleasure and joy and discovery and spontaneous wonder are you going to awe me with today? I have no idea. Let's make it a great day." So that's the way to live your life.
Okay. Thank you for this example. Yeah, Tim Ferriss was waiting for you, and if you wouldn't have followed your intuition, you would have not met him. And yeah, the intuition it's a great topic too. We could talk for hours about intuition, I guess. There is something behind intuition that's unfold amazing things. Like you've been to the dining there with the thought that you would probably maybe find your friends there, and you found someone else, and that's beautiful. I love that. Thank you very much, Dawson. I love that interview, and I love knowing more about manifesting, what it is to manifest, how to manifest, and how to have that faith in manifesting with the tips that you gave us. I wish you to have a great day.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to share them with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Same. Spreading love always. And I look forward to hearing back from you again.